Do you have any experience?
No, sir, I have no experience, but I'm a big fan of money. I like it. I use it. I have a little. I keep it in a jar on top of my refrigerator. I'd like to put more in that jar. That's where you come in.
Welcome back. Today's lesson is going to be on money. We're going to begin to look at the financial system and talk a little bit about what money is and what defines it. So the section is listed in the on the slide here with pages 798 to 803 in your textbook. And we're going to talk about the functions of money. You should be able to describe the impact that money supply has on aggregate price levels. Be able to distinguish between two different measures of money supply. One's called M1. The other is called M2, and you should be able to calculate how much money exists in the M1 measure versus the M2 measure. So let's start by looking at the roles that money plays in our economy. One of the things that money plays, and what defines something as money, is that it serves as a medium of exchange. By that I mean that the item, whatever it is that we're going to call money, would be used to buy and sell goods, that it would be accepted as payment for goods, which would make our ability to trade for things much easier than if we had a barter system where instead of using things called money, we would just trade a good for a good. And the challenge with the barter system is that it requires what's known as the double coincidence of wants. And that's difficult. What that means is that I need to have what you're looking for, and you have to have what I need, and the two have to match up. So if we're in a barter system and I'm carrying cheese and apples with me, and you want beef and not cheese or apples, then in order for me to make a trade, I need to acquire the good that you're looking for with the goods I have, and I have to go from place to place to place until finally I can find the exact amount of what you want, and then I can make the trade with you. But with this thing called money, this arbitrary thing that we may be using, the paper or something like that, with pictures of dead presidents on it, for example, then I don't need to find that double coincidence of wants. I just hand you that piece of paper with the person's picture on the front, and that will suffice for making a trade. So that's what we mean by medium of exchange. Another thing that money has to have in order to be money is that it has to be a store of value, meaning that it doesn't waste away. So whatever we're using as our money has to have a long shelf life, basically. And so it needs to be something that I can have now, and I can hold on to it for years and years and years, and it'll still have its same shape and its same characteristics and same quality, and I can then hand it to you in the form of payment, and you'll be willing to accept it. The third thing that we need in order to have money is what we call a measure of value, and that means that we have to be able to use this thing to be able to say how much a good is worth relative to that thing. So if we're using a bill with a picture of a president on the front, then we say that the good that I want to purchase, it needs a certain number of those bills, and that would be a measure of value, as opposed to comparing goods to each other. So instead of saying that a pound of cheese is equal to a dozen eggs, or a half a pound of sausage, or a quart of milk, we're saying that that pound of cheese is worth 6 of these pieces of paper with the president's face on it. And so we have something that serves as money and fits that technical definition of money if we can state prices in terms of that currency. And you'll have an opportunity to try and make sure you understand these 3 different roles of money in class. I'll give you some options or some potential products or commodities that could be used as money potentially, and you'll decide whether or not it meets all 3 of these characteristics of a measure of value, a store of value, and a medium of exchange. The other thing we want to talk about is this thing called money supply, and money supply is just basically how much currency, or how much money, how much of this commodity that we're using for exchange, how much of that exists in the economy. And the amount of money in the economy has a direct impact on price levels. And we're going to do more of this a little later in another lesson, but the short story basically is that if we put more money into the system, if we increase what's known as our money supply, or the amount of money that's in the economy, then if there's more of that, it causes the value of money to decline or to fall. So money is relatively less expensive than it was before. So interest rates fall, and we said that if interest rates fall in the past, we've determined that that means that there'll be more consumption and more investment, which would cause aggregate demand to shift to the right. And at the same time, if we were to reduce the amount of money that's in the economy, that would be the opposite effect. It would cause the price of money to get bid up as people are competing for a limited amount of this thing called money, which would cause interest rates to rise, and it would be a fall in investment, and aggregate demand will shift to the left. And that's really kind of the beginnings of what we would call monetary policy, which is coming down the line. When it comes to how much money is in the money supply, there are two measures that the Federal Reserve uses. The first is what we call M1, which is basically currency in circulation. It is the most basic definition. So anything that is cash, that are checks, that are traveler's checks, are considered part of M1. So any cash you have in your pocket, change, dollar bills, stuff like that, anything you have in a checking account, which is called checkable bank deposits, and anything that's traveler's checks. This is basically the most, what we call, liquid form of money in the system, and it's the most basic definition. I can use it immediately to purchase goods and services. We have what's called M2, which is the other measure, and that includes everything in M1 plus what are termed near monies. It's things that can be relatively quickly converted into a liquid form of money, but aren't at the current time. So things like your savings account, certificates of deposit, or money market accounts all fit under this definition of M2. I mean, a savings account is one of those things where I can't write a check. I can't say to a merchant, trust me, I have money in savings. It doesn't work that way. So you'd have to switch your money from your savings account to a checking account and then write a check, and then the merchant would accept it, which is why a savings account is what we call near money, or M2. Certificates of deposit are similar. What that is you go to the bank and you give them money, and you tell them essentially, I'm not going to ask for this money again for 3 months or 6 months or however long the term of the deposit is, and then the bank can go ahead and invest it themselves or give it out in form of loans, and because they know that you're not going to want the money back. Now, if you need to get the money back, you can. You have to pay a penalty, but you can convert a CD into cash relatively quickly, which is why it's part of M2. And a money market account is sort of a hybrid. It's like a CD in the sense that you leave money in the account with limited interest in taking it out, but you can actually write a check against your money market account a couple of times a month. So it's not exactly like checks, but it's not exactly like CDs. It's sort of in between, which is why it's considered part of M2. Now, one way to think of M1 and M2 is as concentric circles. Basically, M1 is part of M2. It is a subset of M2, because M2 is much broader in its definition of what money is. So if you face a problem that says, well, if I convert my money from cash and put it into savings, what does that do to M1? We'd say that taking cash and putting it into a savings account would take money out of M1 and place it into M2. Did M2 get bigger? No, because M1 was always part of M2. But did this area of M1 get smaller? And the answer is yes. So when we're shifting money from the M1 classification to the M2 classification, we see a reduction in M1 but no change in M2. If we were to convert some of our money that lies in savings and then go to the bank and take out cash from our savings account, again, would that change M2? No. But would it change M1? Yes, it would add money to M1. Another possible variation might be that if I write a check and cash it at the bank, does that change anything? And the answer there is no. I'm basically taking some of my money, which was M1, and moving it over here to another part of M1, but it still remained within the M1 classification, so there is no change in that situation. So there are lots of different variations in variables, and you're going to see some of this in your problem set. But I just wanted to try and walk you through some of the thought process behind shifting between M1 and M2. If you would be sure to read your textbook and make sure that you are up to speed on all the information that's in there, as well as what I just went over, then you should be in good shape, and there'll be a problem set waiting for you when you get into class. See you then.